From a closet, also known as the Jim McCarthy Voiceovers World Headquarters Studio, this is the JMVO Weekly Primer. Please subscribe, rate, and comment via jimmccarthyvoiceovers.com/podcast. This is episode 15 of the JMVO Weekly Primer. The JMVO Weekly Primer is about making your life better through marinating your mind in good stuff. My name is Jim McCarthy, the owner, operator, and chief bottle washer at Jim McCarthy Voiceovers, and I believe that we as business owners and entrepreneurs, we are bombarded by negativity every day, and it's the last thing that we need. If you want to see your life and business change for the better, consume nurturing good stuff. And my guest today is a great guest by far. I've heard his name. We were just having this conversation. Since 2011, he's come into my lexicon since I joined an organization called BNI, Business Networking International. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. The early days of BNI, the trials and tribulations, the drive that he had. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Ivan Misner. Thank you for being with me today, sir.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.
Not a problem. Hopefully that was a intro fitting of a man of your stature.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Every time I hear the BNI podcast, I always emulate your voice guy because that's a lot of what I do. I do voiceover for podcasts, and I've been doing voiceover for 20 years. Yeah. But I always think, founder of BNI. I don't know if that's an audition or if, you want to.
Listen, at some point we have to redo it. So I'll keep your name and number.
I'm just saying I'm available. So basically, starting out way back in 1985, you started this organization. Did you ever see it becoming like this? First and foremost, BNI, if you're not aware of it, is what I call. I'm the guy in the chapter that actually goes and tries to close the visitors. Not that we want to really call it that, but we try and take the
invite them to join.
Invite them to join, exactly. And I always say that consider BNI as like hand-to-hand combat marketing. And that's kind of the way I bake it down. With intent to come to the group with a referral, have a one-to-one during the week, make sure that you do a CEU and just bring a visitor once a month. It's not that hard.
No. By the way, I call it in one of the first big books I wrote, World's Best Known Marketing Secret, I called it hand-to-hand wombat, word-of-mouth business acquisition tactics.
That's wow. That's a great way to sum it up. And I mean, that's just the way I see it, is that we're all getting together every week and we're coming up with specific asks to meet people. But in the early days, how did the whole thing start? Like, what was the catalyst?
I'd love to tell you that I had this vision of an international organization all over the world. We now have 8,450 chapters in more than 71 countries around the world. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, I was looking for referrals for my consulting practice. I put together some people I trusted. I was willing to refer them. I was hoping they'd be willing to refer me. And one thing led to another, and people started coming that couldn't join because we only take one person per profession. And they'd ask me if I'd help them open up another group, and then another group, and then another group. And in the course of a year, we ended up opening 20 chapters, really by accident, because I didn't have a plan at that point. But at the end of the year, I realized I had struck a chord in the business community. And that's when I sat down and really created the plan for the organization. Last year, we passed 9.1 million referrals, and we generated $11.1 billion
with a B.
$11.1 billion worth of business for our members all around the world. Now, just so you know, Jim, 11.1 billion is the same as the gross domestic product for the country of Liechtenstein.
Liechtenstein.
Yeah, okay, it's a small country, but still. How cool is that we could generate as much business as a small nation in the world? I'm looking for a bigger nation next year, but I think that's pretty good.
Let's get it up to at least Yugoslavia or something.
Yeah.
Trials and tribulations in the beginning, every business, and part of marinating your mind in good stuff doesn't mean everything's going to be sunshine and unicorns. finding out, some of the trials and tribulations any business owner has had on the rise and how you overcame them and turned them into triumphs is still good stuff to marinate your mind in, because all of a sudden a struggling entrepreneur, business owner can picture themselves in your shoes at that time when you were going through telling those stories. What kind of trials and tribulations did you experience as this thing unfolded? Of course, you're doing a consulting business on one hand, but this other thing was kind of developing and you're seeing the traction on it.
Yeah, it's funny. You talked about my podcast. I actually recorded a podcast today entitled "What's in the Way Becomes the Way," and it really was about how in many of our lives, certainly in my life, that oftentimes the thing that was in my way, that when I embrace that, it can become the way. I talk about it in the podcast and in an article I've written, in the sense that about talking. I used to get report cards all the time that said, my grades were pretty good, but I would get this thing where it said, Ivan talks too much in class. And, my mom had a couple of conversations with me, but, I just kept talking. And she'd get these report cards all the time that says, Ivan talks too much in class. And I tried to tone it down a little bit, but my mom, God bless her, she didn't think it was that big a deal because I was doing okay. So she left me alone. And now I talk for a living. I talk to small groups. I talk to medium-sized groups. I talk to large groups. I talk to massive groups. I talk on interviews like this. I talk. It's what I do. I get paid an obscene amount of money to go to associations and organizations and talk. What was in the way became the way for me, and that's what BNI was. What was in the way for me was I lost a big consulting client, and I was desperate for business. And so I tried to turn lemons into lemonade by putting together BNI and finding a way to generate referrals. But the biggest problem I ran into, I think, in the beginning was that there was no real process or system. I was basically creating an industry. And although there were many networking groups out there, there were none quite like BNI in the sense that we were really focused on positive reinforcement. We had accountability. Accountability was a key factor. Education, training, all of these things made for a very different kind of organization. But getting people, entrepreneurs are like cats, it's like herding cats. And so getting them all to follow a program was probably my biggest challenge in the beginning.
See, I was similar to that. My report card, the only difference is that all my report cards had bad grades on them. So Jim's always talking and he never pays attention and, that kind of stuff. Mind
you, my grades weren't extraordinary.
Right.
They were pretty good. They were okay.
So some of that, do you recall anything specifically as a trial and tribulation in the early days of BNI that you figured out a way around?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the biggest one was the way we set up the program. A fair amount of the membership dues stayed with the chapter to do marketing. And the problem is we didn't define marketing, and it turned into really bitchin' parties. That's what it turned into. People would throw these incredible mixers, and I'd go to these things. I remember going to one, and they had about 35 members in the chapter, and this was going to be their big marketing push for the year. They had 32 of their members show up and no visitors, not one. And I remember eating all the marketing money thinking, this is all our marketing money for the year. I went to another chapter, and the president there was an attorney, and he said, look, I'm a lawyer. I don't have time to do this. This should be your job. You should be doing this. And so going back to the 20 chapters that we had and say, hey, that marketing money you have now, you got to give it back. Yeah, I didn't think that would go over too well. So I actually took a loan out on my house and created marketing materials that we could give to all of the chapters to help them, develop and work on building the chapter. And what I did then was I created a task force of BNI members to get them together. And I just started the dialogue by saying, how's this marketing fund working? And they all said, it's not working at all. It's not doing well. And I said, what do you think we should do? And somebody said, well, you know what? Honestly, we should centralize this. And I went, that's a great idea. And to be honest with you, I thought the same thing. Let me show you what we could do. And I had cases of materials. And I just started handing them around. And they're like, yeah, this is what we need to do. And I said, I agree, but how do we tell the chapters that? And they were great. They said, yeah, you can't do it. And I'm like, what? Well, we have to do it. Because if you go to the chapters and say, we're going to change this all, and we're going to take control and centralize it, they'll kill you. So let us do it. And that, Jim, that works so brilliantly. The fact that they volunteered to do it and then they went and did it, and we made the transition, and all the chapters transitioned pretty easily. The only thing they said is, do you have a lot more material so we can come bearing gifts? And I gave them boxes of stuff. That was so successful, that task force became our International Board of Advisors, which is still in existence today. It started 1 year after we started, so the Board of Advisors has been around now 32 years, so that every policy that exists in B&I was created by or approved by our Board of Advisors. So one of the biggest problems, again, something in our way, ended up becoming our way by incorporating the Board of Advisors into every decision that involves members.
Well, and a lot of business owners need to realize, as this thing unfolded and you realized that you had something special in your hands, it's just going to take time for it to kind of work itself out. And even today, here we are 30 some odd years later, it's still kind of working itself out. There are new policies and procedures coming in. You mentioned accountability before.
It's one of our core values.
That's a huge part of it. A huge part of it.
So one of the strengths of a network is that most of the members are friends. One of the weaknesses of a network is that most of the members are friends. Friends don't like to hold each other accountable, but BNI is not a friendship organization. It's a referral organization. And so, yes, friendships are critical in order to generate referrals, but it has to be in the context of some level of accountability. Hockey without rules would be boxing on ice. You got to have rules, right?
Yeah.
In order to make it work. And
absolutely.
With networking, and that's why we have systems and processes. By the way, I love networks that say, we're going to start our own network, and we're BNI without the rules. I love those groups. And I have directors who say, oh, we should, they're talking about BNI and they're bad-mouthing us and they're doing this and that. We should, hire a lawyer. And I'm like, no, are you kidding me? These guys.
Let them.
And I'll tell you why they're great. They will bring in people who don't believe in systems and processes and rules and accountability. So the people that honestly we don't want in BNI will go there. And the ones who end up there by mistake are going to go, you know what, this isn't working. I think I'm going to try this other program, BNI, which has systems and rules, and we'll get the right people. And so I love groups like that.
One of the breakout chapters here in Middle Tennessee is the Williamson County chapter, and I think they had a turning point about 2.5 years ago where they just really hunkered down and started following to a T all the policies that BNI's laid out. And from there, they've just grown immensely. I mean, they're almost 60 members. I believe.
Oh, that's a fantastic size chapter. Mm-hmm. So I did a training once. It was an advanced leadership team training. And I had a set of people in the room on one corner who were with a chapter that just, if I said up, they said down. If I said left, they said right. I mean, they just disagreed with everything. And then I had another group over on one side, on the other side. It was fantastic. They were a 45-member chapter. They were one of our bigger ones back then. And finally, at the end of my talk, I had somebody say to me, okay, from the corner of the room that were the naysayers. And he said, I have a question, but I don't want you to answer it. I want them to answer it, the really successful chapter. I said, okay. He said, what's the real secret? And they were arguing with me on everything through this training. And they said, what's the real secret? And this guy stood up, president of the chapter, and he held up one of our manuals. And he said, we do this. That's it. He said, I'm sitting here listening to you, and you're complaining about everything, and you're disagreeing with half of it. Just stop. I don't have time. He said, I don't have time to reinvent the wheel. We just follow the program. That's what you need to do.
Last year's president, Kevin Michelson, just popped up. He's a great friend of mine. He says, come visit us, Ivan.
So, if I would, here's a good referral for me. A cloning clinic. Because if I caught a chapter meeting every work day of the year,
you wouldn't be able to get to them all.
It would take 38 years to get to all the chapters.
Who's that kind of time?
Yeah. That's a
Well, okay. When did it actually start happening for you when you started? Did you see BNI as a full-time job immediately, or how long did it take?
No, BNI was part of my consulting business for the first 3 or 4 years. And I'll tell you what happened was I had somebody, it was 1989, and I had someone say to me, so what do you do? Do you do this consulting thing, or do you do this BNI thing? And I said one too many times, Jim. I said one too many times. Consulting is my vocation, and BNI is my avocation. Mm-hmm. I just love what I'm doing with BNI. And I started asking myself after that, after I said that to that guy, why am I not living my avocation? Why am I not doing what I'm passionate about? And so I made the decision to transition, and I sold off my consulting practice and decided to do BNI full time.
That's interesting, because I just put up a post today just saying, hey, do you know what you were meant to do, and are you doing what you were meant to do? And
I love my consulting business, by the way, but I could only help a handful of people at a time. Mm-hmm. And I viewed BNI as an opportunity to make a difference in thousands and thousands of people's lives. And that's why I made this switch.
At what point in the process of BNI did you realize, man, we've got a monster on our hands?
I would say pretty early on, certainly within the first 3 or 4 years. I mean, we have 60 chapters within 3 years. And certainly by 4 years, it was difficult for me to do both businesses. So I realized that at that point, I started thinking this could be international. And I actually changed the name. Our original name was The Network. But you can't trademark that.
Right.
It's too generic. So I changed the name to BNI, which stands for Business Network International. And I did that before we were international. It's part of that law of attraction for me. Is
put it out there.
Vision, put it out there. And so BNI stands for Business Network International.
Yeah, and come to think of it, I mean, the network.
Yeah.
That has a ring to it.
Yeah, but you can't trademark it. And I wasn't thinking trademark when I started BNI.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because a lot of business owners probably don't think of that kind of stuff early on. But I mean, a good thing that you did. It's such an iconic networking organization, obviously. So over time, so you got up to 60 chapters. Was that in multiple states, multiple communities, or in the same?
Multiple states. We were in California, Arizona, Montana. There's more mountain goats than people in Montana, but it was the third state for BNI. And Hawaii. Those are the first 4 states we were in.
What drove you? What continued to drive you? And what was and is your why to this day?
Oh, I mean, how much time do we have for the why? I think everybody is really driven by their why. Mm-hmm. And my why, I wrote about my why in a book called The Networking Disconnect. And I'll tell you the story. I'll try and make it as short as possible. I was in high school. I was a freshman in high school. And when I was in junior high school, I had run for student council 2 times. And I lost. And I not only lost, I was decimated. I was just completely wiped out. I was dead last. I was sort of the laughing stock of the school. And so I was like, when I'm a freshman, they selected the freshmen from the freshman high school history class. And the teacher stood up and he said, okay, we're going to pick the student council reps. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that again. Been there, done that. That was painful. I'm not running. And so he said, we'll take any nominations. And there were no nominations. And he said, well, if you don't nominate somebody, and you can nominate yourself if you want. If you don't nominate somebody, then I get to pick. And no nominations. So even we had this one girl, I'll never forget, Cheryl. Cheryl stood up and said, she was a cheerleader. Cheryl said, oh, Mr. Romero, I'm just so busy. If I weren't so busy, I would run, but I don't have the time. I remember Mr. Romero going, well, thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate that. Anybody? Nobody. So I didn't say anything. And he said, okay, well, then I'm going to pick. And they're like, yeah, pick. We don't care who. And he looked around the room and he looked at me. And he said, and he'd only known me for like 2 weeks. He said, Ivan, I bet you'd like to do this, wouldn't you? I was like, wow. Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I kind of would. And he said, okay, Ivan is the student council representative. Now, I swear to you, everyone in unison at that moment said, oh, no, not Ivan. Anybody but Ivan. And I remember sitting there thinking, you guys, like, you see me here, right? And
I'm right here.
I'm right here. And even Cheryl stood up and said, oh, well, Mr. Romero, if you're going to pick Ivan, then I'll run. And he's like, no, listen, I told you guys. I'm not making this up. He said, I told you guys I could pick. You didn't choose. I pick Ivan. Let's turn to chapter 2, page 35, and we'll get started. And I remember, your question is, what's my why? I remember so vividly thinking that I had a great opportunity here and that I was not going to let this go. And he supported me. He helped me. He gave me an opportunity to do something I was passionate about and successful with, because that same class that said, oh, no, not Ivan, at the end of the year when they were voting on the sophomore representative, voted for me. So I was the sophomore representative from that same class that said, oh, no, not Ivan. And so I realized years later that my entire life has been doing businesses that are about helping people succeed. Mm-hmm. Because that's what Romero did for me. That's my why. I can't make you successful, but I can give you an environment to help you become successful. And that is my why.
And that's a lot of what BNI is all about.
Yeah.
So you kind of brought a lot of those core values in with you.
Yeah.
And building BNI. And of course, at the end of the day, you can actually, at that point be like, man, you have no idea what I'm going to create in the future, man. Let me ask you, you're also a big proponent of continuous education. That's a big core value of BNI.
Lifelong learning.
Yeah. I call it marinating my mind in good stuff. I mean, my story of entrepreneurship full-time entrepreneurship began in 2016. And immediately at that point, when I made the jump, it was just feed my head good stuff, good, helpful stuff that kept my mind in the right direction. What are you continuously do this? What are you feeding your mind these days?
Oh gosh, there are so many. I could just reach out over here to the stack of books that I've got sitting right here that I really recommend. There's a really good book that was just done by a great friend of mine, Jim Blasingame, called The Third Ingredient. It's about technology. Okay. Fantastic book by Jim. Matthew Pollard. I just saw Matthew yesterday. He dropped by to visit me. The Introvert's Edge. That's another really, really good book. Some of the books that I've read that are, I think, integral to my success in business would be The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. It's been around forever and ever and ever, but I scaled my company based on the advice that Michael Gerber gives in the E-Myth, which stands for the entrepreneurial myth. Other books, Crucial Conversations. If you ever have a situation where you've got somebody that it's a tough conversation, that is the absolute best book ever written on how to deal with conflict through a conversation. Right. And Conscious Capitalism would be another one. That's a book about how do you become a conscious capitalist? That is, that you want to give back to the communities for which you serve, and so I really love that. So there's a handful of books that I really recommend.
That's a giver's gain type of mentality right there.
It really is. Conscious capitalism, absolutely. And I really believe as a business person, I can't tell you what to do, but as a business person, I believe I have an obligation to put back into the communities from which I draw. It's the reason that my wife and I created the BNI Foundation 20 years ago this year, 1998. We created the BNI Foundation. We've now given millions of dollars to programs for children and education all around the world.
Now, if you ever visit a BNI, this is for the audience, if you visit a BNI meeting, you'll see that all the chapter members go around, they give a 30 to 60, sometimes 45-second commercial about their business, and there are typically 2 feature presentations where 2 of the members have their turn to get up and tell more about their business and ask specifically who they're looking for in their business. One of the components to that is getting introduced, and one of the questions that they ask you in your bio is, what are your keys to success? And it's something that you just hit on here. Mine's always kind of been ambiguous and somewhat nebulous over the years, but lately I've really kind of honed it down. For me, it's about helping without any expectation in return. It's not, well, I got to monetize the way I'm helping this person. It's like, if I can help somebody and I've got something of value to give them, why not have the conversation?
Well, it's the way you build a relationship.
Yeah.
Because I believe that networking is more about farming than it is about hunting. It's about cultivating relationships with people, which means that if you want to build a relationship with somebody, if you can find a way to help them, and I don't mean sell them your product or service, I'm talking about genuinely helping them through a referral or recommendation, then that's the beginning of starting a relationship, and it's that relationship that can help them be successful. Here's one other thing that I think is really important, and I think the average business person gets this completely wrong. If you're listening to me the first time, write this down. It's the number one mistake that business people make. If you want to be successful in business, do 6 things 1,000 times, not 1,000 things 6 times. Do 6 things 1,000 times, not 1,000 things 6 times. I think most business people they're chasing these bright, shiny objects constantly, and they don't give something enough time to make it work. And so use a virtual mentor, have a real mentor give you some advice on what are and by the way, it doesn't have to be 6, it could be 5, it could be 7. But you do a handful of things. Figure out what those are, and then be like a dog with a bone and do it over and over and over again. 6 things 1,000 times.
You mentioning building relationships. I'm a huge fan of, everybody knows, Gary Vaynerchuk. I came across a guy in 2015 and I fell in love instantly. But he's huge on that as well. And this is the whole purpose of my interview with you, is in the digital age, with the way BNI works and having it so interpersonal and have that hand-to-hand combat marketing, how does the digital shake hands with that portion of what BNI is? Yeah,
so look, I believe it's not either or, it's both and. Yeah. That they are both tools in your toolbox for marketing. And I'm a fan of online networking, social networking. I'm a big fan. I'm very active on Facebook and LinkedIn, Twitter. And so I really believe in both. When I did an interview in Stockholm a number of years ago, and there was some 20-something-year-old kid, really young 20-year-old, who was doing the interview. And he met me, and he spent the first, I'm not making this up, he spent the first 3 or 4 minutes of the interview beating me up for running what he called the buggy whip business of the networking industry. Mm-hmm. That's what he called it. I'm like, what? The what? He said the buggy whip business. It's like when the horse and carriage was replaced by the automobile, there was no need for the buggy whip, and so the buggy whip business went out of business. And that's what your network is. It's a buggy whip business of networking, because it's going to go out, because online networking is going to take it over. I'm like, okay. So I said to him, so why are you here? He said, because my boss said I had to come do this interview. I said, well, I get it. You're not too excited about it, but why are you here? Because it took you an hour and a half to get here. It's going to take you longer to get back with the traffic. And Jim, without blinking, he looked at me and said, oh, because a face-to-face interview is always better.
Thank you.
Yes. And when I said that to him, he was like, okay.
I got it.
Okay, I got it. That makes sense. Look, maybe someday when we can have holographic meetings like the Jedi Knights in Star Wars, where you have a holographic night and a real night and then a couple of holographic nights, maybe then you don't have to be face-to-face. But until then, I think it's important. And by the way, when we get there, I want to be Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I got the hair for it. Well,
and the background and the equity, of course. We're going to get a little bit more fun now. Not that we weren't having fun, but guilty pleasure. Actually, no, I'm going to ask you a real serious question. What frustrates you about what you do?
I think people that constantly want to reinvent the wheel. I mean, 33 years, 8,450 chapters. If you ever look at the BNI program and you say, this really kind of works, it's because we've screwed up so much along the way that we figured out how to make this work. And so don't reinvent the wheel, follow the program. That's one of the things that just shake my head. Why would you join a network that's tried and true and then try to change it?
I can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a frustration I've certainly experienced. What's the most satisfying about what you do?
I love meeting members and directors and them telling me their story and telling me, when people come up to me and say, I'm in business today because of BNI, or, I've learned things in your books that just changed the way I do business and it's changed my life. Life doesn't get any better than that. That's worth it all.
Did you ever have is there anything that you've always wanted to do? I mean, if you were able to do it, mine was always being like a drummer, if I could actually make a living at it. But
no, I think I'm living the life that I created. It was created on purpose, and I'm living that purpose. So I feel good about it. I mean, there are things I still want to do. I still have books. I've done a lot of books, but I still have a handful. I'm working on 2 or 3 right now. So there's a lot more I want to do, but there's no passion that I've got. Well, okay, yeah, actually there is one. There is one, but I'm already passionate about it, but I haven't really spent a lot of time studying it. I'm actually considering getting a sommelier credential or certificate.
Beautiful.
I don't own a restaurant. I don't have any reason other than I'm passionate about wine. So I'm thinking about getting a sommelier certificate. But otherwise, I've done everything that and I continue to do the things that I love doing.
Are you a fan of Vaynerchuk at all? Do you know his background?
I don't know him well. I know of him.
Yeah. That's how he came up, was in the wine business.
Yeah.
Yeah. He built his family's wine business, and he was talking today. I listened to his book. He says that, he wishes he can go back and challenge himself to put it on video that in 3 years, I will be able to taste these wines blindfolded and tell you exactly what types of Merlots they are. Yeah. He's like, he tasted so many wines that way.
Yeah. I bet, I think an entrepreneur is either working in their flame or working in their wax.
Interesting.
When they're in their flame, they're on fire. They're excited. They love what they're doing. They're passionate about it. You can see it in the way they act. You can hear it in the way they talk. When you're working in your wax, it takes all their energy away. And you can see it in the way they act, and you can hear it in their voice. I believe in trying to work in my flame as much as possible. And sometimes that means reinventing yourself to do things because as life goes on, what was your flame may become your wax. And so reinvent yourself as you need to, so that you're spending a life working in your flame rather than your wax.
There's actually, that's a great quote. You've got a lot of good quotes. One of which that I remember in one of the podcasts that really stayed with me, and I parrot it to other people, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah, I didn't make that one up, but it's a great concept, and it certainly is my mantra. I believe that is absolutely true. That if you're a part of an organization with a great strategy and a marginal culture, you're not gonna do well. But if you're part of a company that's got a great culture and a marginal strategy, you'll make it. But if you're a company with a great culture and a great strategy, you're going to be the industry leader. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the secret sauce. I think culture is the secret sauce to a successful business.
I had a guy named Arnie Malham on a couple of months ago. I believe it was episode 11. He started a company here in Nashville called CJ Advertising, where they specialized in personal injury attorney marketing, market specific. And for 10 or 15 years, they were head down. They built the company up and interviewed a potential team member. Now, put yourself in his shoes as I'm telling the story. And as I were interviewing him, they asked him, well, what are your hesitations? And he said, the only hesitation is the fact that I really don't want your company on my resume.
Okay, good for him.
at that point, it was quite the turning point. And
that might have been a little more blunt than I would have given, but okay.
Yeah. But man, those sandpaper conversations and those truths, if you don't know what they are, he's now, he turned his company around so much that he is like a destination workplace, but also other companies look to him to tour what he's doing. He actually, they come in and tour his business. And what are you doing to make this culture, everybody's swimming and rowing in the same direction? So
listen, I think you need to turn down a business from time to time. I had someone a few years back who he hadn't actually gone to a BNI meeting. He'd heard about it. He'd read about it. And he got me on the phone and we were talking and he said, well, you got to sell me on this idea. And I actually said to him, the truth is I'm not in the convincing business. That's not what I do. And so I tell you what, you got my number, go to a BNI meeting. And if you think this is something for you, then give me a call back. Otherwise, this isn't a good fit, but I appreciate your time.
And and the BNI meetings themselves have their own cultures.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. And they got to really, from the leadership, it's got to come down, and people got to believe in the leadership team. They got to, abide by all the different procedures and everything. So,
but I tell you how to create a great culture in a BNI chapter is focus on the core values, the 7 core values of BNI. If you focus on the 7 core values of BNI, you can't help but create the culture that you're supposed to have in a chapter. And so how do you do that? We have the education coordinator on a regular basis talk about one of the core values, or you have the president say to one of the members, could you share with us and prep them, let them know it's coming. Maybe the education coordinator does this. You say, can you tell us about our principal core value and what it means to you, the idea of giver's gain, and have somebody share it. And then next month, have someone share the principal core, or the core value of lifelong learning and accountability and traditions plus innovation. And when you're talking about the core values and you're teaching each other how they apply to each other, that's the way you build a great culture.
and it really does work. I mean, like I said, in the chapter that we have here, which I'm actually transitioning into, the Williamson County chapter, it's the energy you feel walking through the door is palpable. I mean, it really is. Yeah.
Now, for those people who are watching this that aren't in BNI, what I just shared with you is applicable in your business.
Mm-hmm. It is.
You want to bring a great culture to bear in your business, create your core values early. Share those core values regularly. People say, well, I only have one employee. Well, do it now, because when you have 50 employees, it's too late. When you have 10 employees, it's too late. So do it now. So a lot of what I'm talking about, although we're talking about it in the context of BNI, this is stuff that's valuable to any business that wants to succeed.
What's the current song on the radio that really gets you going and fired up?
I couldn't tell you to save my life. Not to save my life, what a current song is on the radio. I'm sorry. If you want to talk about the Beatles or Neil Simon or,
Okay, anything like that, something that comes out of the woodwork that, what's the song that does it for you?
So I love the Beatles, but I'm aging myself. Let It Be, Hey Jude. I love that era of music, sort of classic rock music.
Yeah. I mean, it's in the 80s when BNI came out, it was kind of like the era of the hair bands and Van Halen.
Yeah, that's true. I'm a little before that, but in terms of the music that I really enjoy, I was up on the music pretty well, maybe 5 or 10 years ago when my kids were teenagers, and it was playing around the house and in the cars, they wanted me to play certain songs, but I couldn't tell you today.
Well, I'm going to wrap things up, and I'm just going to wrap up with this question. Was this or was this not the best interview you've ever had?
Absolutely the best interview I have ever had in my life.
I'm going to document that, and I'm going to hold you to it.
I'll tell you this, it was a really, really good interview, and you had some great questions.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to know about me?
Yeah, sure. We could talk a little longer. Absolutely. I'll tell you, there's one other thing I'd like to share with your listeners. And that is, I think it's one of the most important lessons I've learned about networking. And that is, the old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's either. I think it's how well you know each other that really counts. It's not just a matter of having somebody in your database. The real question is, can you pick up the phone, call that person? Would they take your call? And if you ask them for a favor, would they do it happily or willingly? Mm-hmm. That's the power of a network. So it's not what you know or who you know, it's how well you know each other that really counts. It's all about relationships.
Dr. Misner, how can people find you and look you up, man?
Well, listen, BNI.com. That's if they're interested in BNI at all. Also, I have a blog, IvanMisner.com. That's IvanMisner, IvanMisner.com. I have hundreds and hundreds of blog stuff up there. It's all free content if you want to learn how to network and how to scale your business. I talk a lot about scaling. Go to IvanMisner.com.
Right on. Thank you for being a part of the JMVO Weekly Primer. Of course, please subscribe, rate, comment on the podcast. You can always find us and pick your poison on iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry at jimmccarthyvoiceovers.com/podcast. And that wraps another episode of the Weekly Primer. Let me know your thoughts on this episode. We'd love to hear back from you. And if you have any other questions for Ivan, definitely hit him up. Thank you, Dr. Misner.
Thank you, Jim. Call me Ivan.
Ivan. Thank you, sir.